Do you actually know when you should use who and when you should use whom? When I've asked that question in class, some people reckon they do, and then when they explain what they think it is, maybe it's not actually what the grammar book says it is. Some people actually do know what the difference is. Other people don't know, but they could tell you that for some reason whom sounds a bit fancier, but they're still a bit vague on these things. Then there's another question, which is, well, if no one actually uses it in real life, or most people don't even know how to use it in real life, does it even matter? Like, who or whom? Who cares? You know, if no one even uses it, why does it matter? Maybe there's other ones out there that we don't even know of. Who knows? So I think most of us have seen an argument like this where people have argued about that's you're saying that wrong, or that sentence is wrong, or that's not how you spelled this word, or whatever. And this kind of debate, basically arguing about what is correct and what is not correct, and who even makes these rules, we can bring this back to something called prescriptivism versus descriptivism, which is something that has been causing arguments in language for as long as people have been speaking. So, definitions of what we're talking about here. On the one hand, you can have a view of language use which you would call prescriptivist. This is when, basically in prescriptivism, you have rules. You have an established set of rules, and anything that you want to make correct has to follow these rules. So, anything that breaks the rules would be considered a mistake. So, someone who's really picky about spelling, or someone who's really picky about punctuation and things like that, that's prescriptivism, when you are really focusing in on it's all about the rules, and getting the rules right is maybe more important than what you've actually said, what you've actually communicated. The opposite view is called descriptivism. If you have a descriptivist view of things, you don't really care so much about rules, or actually in another way, you kind of figure that the rules are defined by how people use the language. So instead of having a set of rules and saying everyone has to do that, you look at how everyone talks and you say that's the rules. And then if you're a descriptivist, that means you're actually going to be more worried about the content and the communication than in whether someone follows the rules of spelling and grammar and so on. So you might be a little bit more flexible on what you think is okay grammar, as long as it gets the point across and it's clear what you mean. So if you're a descriptivist, what you call the standard is defined by usage. So rather than having the rules in the book that maybe were written hundreds of years ago, you might be sort of basing it by how people really talk in the world today. Someone who's descriptivist might see rule breaking as progress instead of mistakes. Now, these two opinions on things both, I think, have their for and against, but it's kind of this thing where it's been a fight ongoing for many times, for many years, and you've all heard people argue about spelling, and no, that's not how you say it, it's graph not graph, or it's gif not gif, or whatever. On the left there, you've got a prescriptivist who's saying there are rules for a reason, scurrilous knave, and on the right, in the less fancy hat, you've got the descriptivist who's saying usage defines language, dog. And I'm very sorry that I said dog like that at the end, but it was written there, so I had to say it. I feel a little bit bad. Anyway, cringy. Now, here's some examples. Like, do rules matter? Let's have a look at some of these. A lot of people would say if you don't follow the rules, it looks bad, or it sounds bad, or it makes you seem uneducated. That's an attitude lots of people would have. They look at this and they go, oh my God, that's the wrong there. And there should be an apostrophe and wasn't. Goodness. So is that, you don't want to look uneducated or something like that? A prescriptivist would say, this is important. You got to fix that. Obviously, I think everyone, even if you are deep down a very passionate descriptivist, you'd probably think that looked bad. Like, obviously, everyone looks at it and says, I can see that it says school, but I would say, and I'm fairly descriptivist, I'll let you in on that now. Even I would say that looks bad. That just looks sloppy, And then other people will say, oh my God, it is killing the English language, where people will say text messages are killing the English language or whatever. A very typical prescriptivist attitude would be that, oh my God, English is dying. English is a dying language because people are saying could have when it's actually could have, as in I could have done it, or people keep saying should have or would have when it's really should have, would have. When you say would have, it's actually apostrophe VE, should have, would have. So is that right? Is the language dying because people are using it badly? That is a very prescriptivist way of looking at things. And then some people will say, look, for better or for worse, there is the thing that in modern society, it's reality that you want to make yourself look smart, look educated, look like you're taking care with things. People might say this, one of the failed candidates for the copywriter's job. Now, I'll come back, there's a bit of a gag mixed in here too. One of the failed candidates for the copywriter's job wants to know what was wrong with his application and everything spelt wrong. I will point out that whoever made this cartoon, who's obviously thinks they're very clever, picking on someone for not being able to spell, obviously you need to be able to spell to be a copywriter. But look, there's a missing apostrophe in copywriter's job. Oof. Take that, prescriptivists. Anyway, one of the questions you can come back to is if we're going to care about rules, who is even making these rules? And that's a very interesting question. We have dictionaries and things like that. How did this come to be? Who wrote these dictionaries? Who decided any of this? I've got a little analogy here. And this is an analogy that someone told me years and years and years and years ago, and I've never been able to shake it out of my head, where we've got a whole bunch of gingerbread men, or gingerbread people. I don't think they care if they're male or female, the gingerbread. These gingerbread humans are all a little bit different. You can see some of them, their arms a little bit thinner than the arm of the one next to it, or some of them were a little bit closer to the front of the oven. They got a little bit burnt. Some of them I really did a terrible job on the icing, and so they're a bit wrong, But ultimately, you can look at them and say, well, they're all from the same cookie cutter. Like, I can work out what shape the cookie cutter was that made them, even if they actually came out all a little bit different. This is an analogy that basically works that we all speak the same language. Everyone who is watching this video speaks English. Probably most of you, if you're in my English class, you're all native English speakers, almost all of you. But everyone's English is different. You all have your own idiolect, which means you all have a unique version of English in your head, which is individual. Yeah, it's unique to you. You have words that only you and your friends use, some little in-house joke you've had forever. There will be little things that you pronounce a little bit differently. There might be some words that you use for things because your parents came from a different country that are different to the person sitting next to you in the classroom and things like that. Everyone has a very slightly, everyone's version of English is unique to you as a single person. So when you look at all these gingerbread and you try to work out what shape the cookie cutter was that made the gingerbread people, that's kind of what people do when they work out what is the standard language, or that's one of the ways that it happens. There's other ways it can happen, but in theory, one of the best ways to do it is work out what is the standard language that we all have in common. Like, what are the rules that essentially all of us are more or less doing? Even then, though, obviously it's a bit squishy because there'll always be little differences here and there. It's actually quite a tricky job. And sometimes making a standard language with rules on the page of the book is a little bit artificial because you have to somehow push things into rules that ultimately there'll be someone out there that says it differently. And this is kind of a descriptivist view of things. So you're saying that this is the rule because we're looking at how people talk and we are describing how they talk and basing it on that. Now, some examples of ways that a really hardcore linguistic descriptivist could look at things. Thanos here is clearly a descriptivist. Basically, reality can be whatever I want. That's maybe a little bit extreme. Thanos here, I'm sorry that I'm covering over part of the quote. Thanos says, as long as there are those who remember what was, there'll always be those who are unable to accept what can be. Now, this is also completely out of context. Actually, that's not what he meant in the movie. He was not talking about linguistics, but it works really well as something that a descriptivist linguist might say. Because languages change. Like, as we using a language, it changes with use. If you can try and keep it frozen in your dictionary. If your dictionary is a freezer and your language is a block of ice, the dictionary can try and keep it frozen. But if you take it out of the freezer to use it, the ice melts a bit, Language will change. If you use the language, it will change a little bit. And something that happens is sometimes you've got a version of the rules of the language in a book that was written 300 years ago. And we don't speak like that anymore. Maybe these rules were a great description of how the grammar worked 300 years ago. But if we don't talk about like that now, should that still be the rules? A lot of people really freak out about things changing in language, But a lot of most linguists these days would say that they were sort of more towards the descriptivist end of things. Not all, and it sort of depends what you're doing. If you're an English teacher, you probably need to be more prescriptivist because you are trying to get your students to write in a way that will advantage them, make them look smart. A lot of people would say, okay, if you follow the rules, you will write more clearly and so on. Okay, we could argue about that for a long time. But anyway, as a lot of English teachers will be very prescriptivist, they would prescribe how to do it, but a lot of linguists would be more descriptivist and get really excited. And if they say, this person's talking really unusually, I need to go and see what they're doing. If you ever get one of these messages on your phone, click allow because you're helping science by doing it. There's another thing that sometimes strikes me is that sometimes prescriptivism is obviously very useful. For me as a German teacher, it's useful for me to have a set of rules for German that I can teach people and say, these are the rules. Later on, once they've really got deep into the rules, then I can tell them how to actually mumble like a German and break some of the rules. But ultimately, it is very useful for me in my job, sort of having this prescriptivist view of these are the rules, learn the rules. But it can also be a negative thing where sometimes people can use language use and like these prescribed rules can even become a bit of a tool of oppression. This diagram here is from a sociology textbook, but it's true that often, people can use linguistics or linguistic prescriptivism. Sometimes will get used to be racist or to be classist when sort of, for example, in England, you would know people in England who are like very, someone who's from an upper class family who speaks very posh, might look down their nose at someone who speaks with a really working class London, Cockney accent, or someone from, a working class person from Newcastle up in the northeast or Manchester or Birmingham or somewhere where they have strong local dialects, or at least like the working class people have strong accents, like strong regional accents and stuff. And people might be discriminated against for that, which is obviously not good. So then the idea of, linguistic prescriptivism as this person talks funny, therefore they're not smart or they're not as good as me. That's very problematic, and that happens. In the real world, this happens all the time. Or in America, some people would use, this is African-American vernacular English. They're talking differently to what the book says is correct English, therefore they are worthless or they're stupid or whatever. And these attitudes are obviously not good, very, very problematic. Using linguistics as an excuse to be racist or classist is clearly not okay. But anyway, so having talked about all that, is there a right and a wrong answer to this? What is the correct way to look at things? Do we say it has to follow the rules or it's bad? Or can we say, look, it's a free-for-all, do what you want, whatever you say, as long as I understand what you said, it's correct. Where do we say what's right and wrong on this? I'm going to say, look, there's a place for both. There are different ways we can use, porque no las dos. There's different ways that both of them can serve a useful purpose. We'll talk about a bunch of them in class. I'm going to finish with this one. Like I said before, linguists, when they are trying to study language in a scientific way, will tend to be more descriptivist. And this cartoon here, which is from Ryan Starkey, he has really, really fun infographics about language and about, like the evolution of language and things like that, and word, lots and lots of stuff on his website. Ryan Starkey, look him up, fantastic stuff, a lot of really interesting stuff. He has this cartoon here, linguistic prescriptivists make terrible zoologists. I'll let you have a look at these pictures and decide for yourself exactly what prescriptivist attitude he is critiquing in each of them. So you can click pause and you guys can have a think about that for yourselves. Alrighty, I will leave you there. Hope some of that was interesting. Again, apologies that I always talk way too much. I'll leave you there. Thanks.